All right, here we are in the last lesson of Module 2 of the Ultimate ZBrush Guide course. Now, this module has been all about introduction to certain things, some practical examples as well, and blocking out the shape of our character. This last lesson is no different, but we're going to focus on adjusting the shapes a little bit so that we can depart from these more primitive shapes. So what we currently have are essentially spheres, cubes, cylinders, that sort of thing. And in reality, the shapes, the organic shapes that we're going for, especially for the character that we're using as a reference, is more organic. So I'm going to show you the process, and now that we have dynamic subdivision enabled, it's going to be really, really easy. So we're going to concentrate on adjusting those shapes. And I'm also going to introduce you to a few other tools that we're going to use quite a bit in the next module. So let's go ahead and start with that. I'm going to go ahead and jump into the full screen mode. And let's start by doing what we always do, which is load the custom UI for this lesson. So the one for this lesson is the adjusting underscore shapes underscore M02 underscore L06. So lesson 6. I'm going to click on open, and there we go. So let me just point out some of the new things just so that you're aware of what's new or what has changed. So in this little gap that we had under the mirror, the mirror button, I added the auto groups and groups visible. We're going to get to that in a second. We also have the solo mode, which is super, super important, and I think is one of the most important tools, but we get to that as well. I also added another brush, the move topological, and a few other brushes here, which are essentially, let me just undo that, masking brushes and selecting brush or selection brushes, and we're also going to get to that. The rest is pretty much the same. These other areas stay the same. So yeah, it's basically 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 new elements that we're gonna go through really quickly. And those are features or elements of the UI that I promise that you're gonna use quite a bit, not only in the course, not only in this course, but once you finish the course and you're starting doing your awesome creations, these are things that you're gonna use quite a bit. All right, so I'm gonna clear that up and start by adjusting the shapes. So I need to make sure that I have symmetry enabled, right? And I'm going to start with the head. So I'm going to hold the Alt key, click on the head, and now I have the head selected, and I can start adjusting the shapes. So I'm going to select the Move tool, click AccuCurve. So all of these things we have already discussed, so I'm going to move a little bit faster. Right click and increase my brush size, and make sure symmetry is enabled. Remember that symmetry is a feature in ZBrush that is dependent on the subtool that you have selected. So you might have symmetry in your body, for example, but when you switch to the head, it might be off. So make sure that it's on, and we can start clicking and pushing things. So that's what I meant about adjusting. It's just very subtle changes, like so, trying to figure out the overall shape. So I'm going to try to push this even further so that we sort of try to blend it with the top part a little bit more. And that's all I want you to concentrate on at this point, is to depart from the very geometrical shape and try to get something closer to the reference file. All right. There's another trick here that I'm gonna show you, which is using the Alt modifier. Right. So let's say that I want to push some of this area behind the eyes a little bit inwards, right? I can just move to the side, or kind of like from this angle, so that the camera is almost on the side view, and I can click and push, right? So that's something that I can do. I'm gonna Control Z to undo that. But the trick that I want to show you is with the Alt key. So with the move brushes, if you press the Alt key and you click and drag, ZBrush is going to move the vertices or the geometry towards the camera or away from the camera, right? So without the Alt key, if I click around this area, the center of the head, and I'm not pressing the Alt, I'm gonna click and I can drag, right? It just performs the normal action of the move brush, right? It's just pushing things up or down. But if I actually wanna push this in or out, I can hold the Alt key, click and drag, and that way it sort of like pushes or brings the polygons forward, right? So we just gave this character a big nose. I'm going to undo that. And that's the little tweaks that I use, or the little trick that I use to push things like so, okay? So I'm going to very, very subtle but it's already starting to give this character a bit of an expression. And it's just about the move brush with the AccuCurve, with this new trick that I just showed you, holding Alt to push things towards the camera. Maybe it's too angry, right? And of course, we can resource back to the smooth brush that we have used already. So if I press Shift, we can go ahead and smooth this out, right? And this looks very, very smooth, but remember, we have dynamic subdivision. So actually what we're editing is just a very low amount of polygons, which is great, okay? Go back to dynamic. And so that's essentially what I want you to focus at this point, just taking these shapes and connect them so that, or like the transition between the different volumes makes sense, all right? Now, there's a few other tools that we can take advantage of. I'm gonna give this guy a bit of a chin before I move forward, right? But I want you to really remember that at this point, we're not using anything fancy. It's nothing else than the move brush with AccuCurve and the smooth brushes to maintain a clean shape, but we're also using the dynamic subdivision so that we can keep things smooth as we clean them up, okay? So very, very, very simple steps, so very, very basic movements. There's not a lot of sculpting here. This is more just adjusting the shapes. We are still at the blocking stage. It's just that we want to block in the character with actual shapes that look like a character and not just cylinders, right? So we could call this last step of the blocking advanced blocking. So we're still blocking, but we're using a much more advanced technique. All right. Now, I'm going to introduce you to one of the most useful tools that I use all the time in ZBrush, which is the solo mode. So the solo mode is this button that I added to the UI. You can click on the solo mode, and what that does is going to isolate whatever tool or whatever subtool you have selected. So that way you can go ahead and, let's say, move this from inside the head maybe a little bit more, right? So let's go ahead and toggle that off, and let's select the hat or the top of the head. I'm gonna click on that, holding Alt and clicking on the subtool, go into solo mode, and you'll see it allows you to visualize the single subtool that you have selected. So I promise that you're gonna be using this quite a bit. I'm gonna enable symmetry, and I'm gonna start pushing things in a bit just to, again, adjust these shapes. Still no sculpting or anything. We still at a very, very early stage of the blocking. But again, having the blocking right or getting that right is almost 80% of the project. All right, I'm gonna get out of solo mode and see how we're doing. And this looks very bumpy, again, because we have the AccuCurve enabled. So if you want, you can toggle that off and have a more smoother effect. I'm gonna go ahead and press Shift and smooth all that tiny bit. Go into solo mode. Just trying to keep everything clean. Get out of solo mode. I'm gonna switch now to the head, holding Alt, pushing that forward. And again, just trying to connect and think about the transition between the shapes. I'm gonna switch back to the head. And as you can see, these tools and this process that I've been showing you, they become almost like second nature. And then you jump between subtools, jump between, the move brush, the smooth brush, all very, very quickly. And that will happen to you as well as you progress and you advance your skills in ZBrush. These tools will become kind of like your bread and butter to work in ZBrush, right? So again, I'm just gonna repeat everything that I did there. Alt, click on the subtool, go into solo mode, adjust whatever shape you want, or adjust it a little bit, maybe around the neck. I'm gonna right click and reduce my brush size, just to add a little bit of a neck or an indication of the neck. Get out of solo mode, see how everything is looking. Maybe push the back of the head up a bit. within solo mode, right? And that's it. And then if you want to adjust, for example, the shape of the top of the head, just hold Alt and go into that as well. All right. So I'm gonna do a time lapse of the rest of this adjustment for the head because, like I said, this is just purely repeating the same actions that I show you. So jumping between the move brush, AccuCurve, solo mode to visualize this on its own, and then just adjusting the shape. So I'm gonna jump into a quick time lapse here to finalize the adjustment of the shape of the head as well as the top of the head, and I'll see you in just a second. All right, so that's the shape of the head that I'm going for. As you can see, I went through, from different angles and make sure that, it had the shape that I wanted. Maybe free here from the top or the bottom view, I can actually make this a little bit more rounded here. But anyway, what I was trying to say is that it's important to, because we're in a 3D world, it's important to see everything from every angle to make sure that it has the shape that you want. All right, so let's go ahead and move forward and work on the hand or adjust this hand. Okay, and for that, I'm going to introduce you to a couple of tools. I'm going to show you the move topological, some different options for the masking brushes as well as the selection brushes. So let's go ahead and hold the Alt key and click on that. And I'm going to go into solo mode as well. And this is the one, it's pretty basic, but we're going to go ahead and adjust this so that it feels more natural. Okay, so if we go ahead and do the same thing that we've been doing with the move brush and AccuCurve, we can tweak it a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and turn off solo mode so that very briefly we can adjust this entire shape a little bit. Right, but let's say if I want to move this finger backwards a bit, right, or this one, it becomes a little bit more more complicated because they are very close to each other. And if I reduce my brush size, I can have less influence, but then moving everything bit by bit is just going to destroy the whole thing. So this is when the different tools in ZBrush, like the move topological, the selection brushes, and the polygroups come into play. All right, so let's go back into solo mode. And if you remember, this is made out of a bunch of different meshes that all live within the same subtool, but they're individual, so they're not sort of merged together. They're not connected by topology. So let me show you what I mean by that. I'm going to select the Select Rectangular Selection tool, which is something that we already talked about, that lives in the Control and Shift key, right? And I'm going to go ahead and hold. You don't have to do this. I just want to show you what is happening. Okay, so if I just hide part of it, part of this mesh, you'll see that there are meshes that intersect with each other. So it makes it look like it's a solid piece, and it all lives within a single subtool, but you have one mesh here, then you have another one here, so on and so forth, right? And this is totally fine. I mean, this is part of the process as well. But having this as separate pieces that live within a single subtool is what allows us to use the different polygroups and the different geometry with the move topological. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to go ahead and hold Control and Shift, and I'm going to click once in the canvas and bring back that up. All right. So if I turn polyframe on as well, you'll see that we have different colors for this area and these ones here. All right, so in ZBrush, these ones are called polygroups, and they're probably one of the most useful features in ZBrush, which are essentially IDs for the polygons. So this is actually a very powerful tool that is going to allow us to select things very quickly. So when you think about polygroups, I want you to remember this. That's the main thing about the polygroups. It's all about selecting stuff. There are a bunch of things that you can do with polygroups that are not necessarily about selection. So, and we're gonna get to that later down the course. But the main thing about polygroups is that it allows you to very quickly select things by just selecting the ID. So I'm gonna show you a practical example of this. So right now I only have 2 polygroups, and if I hold the Control and Shift to access my selection brush, which in this case is the select lasso, this one right here, I'm going to hold Control and Shift and click only once in the green one, right? So now what ZBrush did was to hide everything except the polygroup that has this ID or the green one. So now I can do adjustments on these, like for example, bring in my move brush and adjust these without actually affecting anything else but this, right? Can smooth this, right? Obviously, this is not ideal because I don't see the rest of what's happening here. So let's just bring back the rest of the body and start working towards something that looks a bit more believable, at least in terms of the transition, right? Let's go back into solo mode and let's go ahead and hold Control and Shift and click once in the canvas, and that will bring back the rest of the selection. Now let's say that I want to work on this hand. I will do the same thing, just to repeat, hold Control and Shift, click on that, and then adjust it. Now, if I want to invert that selection, I can hold Control and Shift, click and drag. And clicking and dragging, holding Control and Shift, is just going to invert the selection in the canvas, right? Pretty easy. Now, if you want to bring back everything, hold Control and Shift, click once in the canvas, and there you go. Now, if I want to edit these fingers, for example, because they all have the same ID, it's going to be pretty hard for me to do it with the selection. So I can hold Control and Shift and click, but it's going to select the entire polygroup because it's the same color. And that is when the auto groups comes in handy as well as the selection tools. So let's have a practical example before we get into this of why they're so useful. Let's say that this is an arm that you're planning to later on pose and have very close to the body, and maybe this actually is going to be the elbow. So just imagine that the elbow is here. So this is the shoulder in here, this will be the elbow, and then you have your wrist in here. Just as a quick practical example. It will be ideal to have a polygroup for this upper arm or this upper part of the arm so that we can manipulate it later on. So what we can do is bring in our selection tools, and I can hold Control and Shift. Oops, let me just do it again. Control and Shift and select this part, right? And if for some reason you cannot see inside of the polygon, in other words, if you see something like this, kind of like the inside disappears, that's something that we haven't got to, but very quickly, that is in the display properties. So right now, ZBrush is displaying only the outside of the normals of the polygons, not the inside. You can just go all the way down in your tool palette here where it says display properties, and you can click on this double. If you click double, then ZBrush displays this double. Okay, just in case. Sometimes he's by default off, so in case you don't see it, that's what is happening. But let's go back into it. So I want to try to assign a polygroup to this area, but this one is not the greatest selection. So let's go ahead and hold Control and Shift, click and drag to invert, and I want to actually hide all of these ones as well. So I can try to move the camera around and hold Control and Shift, and then the Alt key as well to remove that part of the selection. Or I can also use the select lasso. So this is kind of like the introduction to the select lasso. It's the same thing as the select rectangular, but the lasso allows you to, holding Control and Shift, do this type of thing, right? So it's very easy to just go ahead and hold Control and Shift and find the selection that you want, then hold the Alt key and then hide that selection, right? I can go ahead and actually hide a little bit more, holding Alt. There we go. And if I made a mistake, I can just hold Control and Shift, click and drag to invert, and come here and delete those, or sorry, hide those. They're not deleted. And now that I have this part isolated, right, I can go ahead and click on this button here in the UI. So this is called Group Visible. So whatever is currently visible is going to be grouped. And ZBrush is just going to give a different color or different ID to this polygon. The color that is given to the mesh or to the area that is being assigned the polygroup is irrelevant. Like the color doesn't mean anything other than showing that it's a different one. So you can actually click on group visible as many times as you want to cycle through the colors. So I'm going to go for something like that so that is clearly different. I'm going to go ahead and hold Control and Shift, click once, and now I have this as it is. Now, why this is important and why it's useful to have a set of polygroups. It's very important and it's very useful because, like I said, later down the track, if you want to select things, polygroups are probably going to be your best friend. So if I want to just select the top of the arm, right? I can go with my mask pen. Remember, that is the tool that lives in the Control key or the modifier. I'm going to turn off polyframe here and hold Control, and I can just start doing this, right? And any part of this mask that is darker, that's the part that I won't affect when I move things around, right? So let's say something like this, right? And I can just refine this going all around, and this is kind of like the manual mode. Oops, all right. And I can go ahead and bring my move brush and I can edit this without affecting the top part. That's ideal. Now I'm gonna go ahead and hold Control, click and drag outside of the canvas to remove that mask. And I'm gonna show you what the idea of the polygroups is in this case. So because we have polygroups, all we have to do is hold Control and Shift to access the selection tools. I'm gonna make sure I have the select rectangular, right? And I'm gonna hold Control and Shift and click once on this one, right? So it isolated the polygroup that we created before. And then I'm going to use the mask lasso. So this is another option that you have for masking. So I'm going to click on this mask lasso. And this one behaves in the same way as select lasso. But instead of hiding things or making visible, you can actually mask. So I'm going to hold Control, click and drag. And now I'm masking this area. Great. So now this is mask. I'm going to go ahead now and click Control and Shift once in the canvas and brings the rest, turn off my polyframe, and now you have a perfect mask based on the polygroups. Now that you have this here, if you want to make the transition between the mask and unmask areas a little bit more softer, you can go to the masking palette here at the bottom, right? And you can blur the mask. And that's going to be very, very subtle, right? You don't have to do any of this. Just want to show you one of the reasons why it's so good to have the polygroups. But in fact, we're not going to use that just yet. I'm going to go ahead and hold Control, click and drag to remove that mask. And now that I have shown you the masking tools as well as the selection tools, let's do a quick recap of what they are and what they do. And then we move into the adjusting of this shape. All the masking tools live within the Control key, and all of the selection ones live within the Control and Shift key at the same time. So with the Control one, I'm going to select Mask Lasso or Mask Pen, sorry, and that is the one that allows you to basically paint, right? Control, click and drag to remove. The Mask Lasso allows you to mask things based on the camera just by doing this. One thing that I should mention is be careful if you, for example, do something like this, because the masking is done based on the camera angle. Then here at the other side, you should also have the same effect. So a quick way to fix this is just to, once you've done your masking with the lasso here, you can click once in the canvas holding Control to invert that mask, and we've already gone through that process, and then simply mask this area. So now you only have this area of mask. We can hold Control, click, and invert that mask. All right, and then we have the select lasso, Control and Shift to access that area, and we can basically play around with the selection tools to reduce the selection, to refine the selection, or invert the selection as well, and so on and so forth. And finally, the one that we already knew is the select lasso. The select rectangular, right? So the reason I want to put some emphasis in this lesson and I go through all of these ones right now before actually doing anything is because these tools are the type of things that are going to become second nature, and if you're going to follow some tutorials later on or new courses later on down the track, a lot of the ARIs that will be teaching you different things assume that some of these things are basic knowledge, right? So it's important to get them right, and then you can follow along a little bit faster, in other future tutorials and that sort of thing. So I just want to give you the tools that you need to basically do whatever you want in ZBrush. Alrighty, so let's go ahead and do the auto groups. So I'm going to turn on polyframe, and I'm going to go ahead and group visible. So group visible is going to give me a single ID, but then we have the auto groups. And all of these auto groups and group visible live within the polygroup palette here, or sub palette, right? So you can feel free to explore the different options that you have. We're not going to use any of these at this point because they're for very specific things. But the important ones that you need to remember are here in the UI. So group visible is going to give you a group based on what you see in the canvas. But auto groups, if I click on that, you'll see it automatically gives me a different polygroup to all of these meshes because they have different topology. In other words, they don't have continuity in the topology like I showed you before. So if I go to the head, for example, just clicking on the subtool of the head, remember we're in solo mode, so we're a little bit off. Let's click solo mode again, and we have a single polygroup. If I click auto group, it's basically like the same thing as doing group visible. It's not going to change anything because this is a single mesh, right? The same thing happens, for example, if I go down to the claws. So I'm going to get out of solo mode, select the claws, go into solo mode. These are all different separate meshes, but they live within the same subtool. So I can click on auto groups, and I'm going to get different polygroups. All right, so that's an important concept to get right before we move forward. So with that in mind, let's go back to the hand. And we can start adjusting the hand, but since we have polygroups, we can go ahead and hold Control and Shift, click on that one to isolate it. Now I can bring in my mask lasso, mask the entire thing, bring back everything with a single click, and Control and Shift and single click on the canvas. So now this area is masked. We don't have to have the polyframe enabled, and we can use our move brush to start adjusting this, right? We can also invert that selection, or let's say I actually want to just tweak the centerpiece. So Control, click once in the canvas, and now I can start pushing just this area. Now remember that at this point we're still blocking shapes, right? We're not trying to do any details or get like a super accurate description of the shapes. We just need to tweak this original blocking of the shapes. Still blocking. All right, so let's say that's looking a little bit better, but I actually want to move some of these pieces. So I'm going to go ahead and hold Control, click and drag to remove the masking. And now I'm going to select this one, Control, Shift, and click. And remember, we don't have to have the polyframes, but this one has its own polygroup. I'm going to mask that, invert that selection to bring back the selection, invert the mask by holding Control and click once in the canvas. And again, this is something that we already talked about. And we can use the move brush, or we can bring in the Gizmo 3D. If we bring the Gizmo 3D, it's going to be around here. And remember, we can center it to the unmasked areas by using these go to the unmasked areas. So the third one here. So I'm going to click on that. And now the gizmo is going to be centered in just this area that we have unmasked, right? So we can just tweak this as much as we want. All right, and we can do the same thing. Let's clear the mask, Control, click, and drag. I'm going to do the same thing for the top one. Mask that, bring back the selection, maybe invert the mask actually. Bring in the gizmo, center it. And just adjust it, right? So as you can see, I did this a little bit faster here. But the whole idea is that I'm repeating the same action. So it's just important to practice a little bit the Control and Shift to access the different polygroups, how to invert the selection, how to hide different parts. So all I'm doing here is holding Control and Shift and then clicking either one part that has a polygroup or clicking and dragging in the canvas to invert it and click again in the parts that I want to isolate. That's all there is. And click once in the canvas, holding Control and Shift to bring everything back on. All right, so this is kind of like a good example of why the polygroups are so useful and so important in order to to select things and adjust the shapes. But there's also a very powerful tool, which is the move topological. So the move topological is essentially the same thing as the move brush, but with the move topological selected, if I go ahead and click on that, Cirrus is going to only affect the areas of the mesh that you first clicked on based on the topology. So in other words, if I just want to affect this finger here, right, with the move topological, I'm going to click around here, which is, is still part of this yellow polygroup, and you'll see I can actually just move this polygroup without affecting anything else, even though the brush cursor and the reach of the brush size is pretty close. Right? So this is extremely helpful because you don't have to go through the trouble of holding Control and Shift, click and drag, or selecting different pieces, masking them, and then move on. Just with this brush, you can go ahead and do all of this, which is great. And that's essentially what I'm going to do. Right? The Control and Shift click brushes, the selection brushes, are incredibly useful in other situations that probably the move brush is not going to be ideal. But I just wanted to show you both. And in this case, all I want you to do is take the move brush, the move topological brush, and start adjusting these shapes when we have multiple elements or multiple objects within the same subtool, like in this case. There are going to be certain points where it's actually easier to isolate the polygroup rather than using the move topological. So I can hold Control and Shift, click on this selection, and then just push this one back a bit. All right. So that's essentially what this process is, right? Adjusting shapes. It's just taking the original very geometric and very basic shapes and adjusting them so that they feel more organic and really part of these characters characters limbs, for example, or the body, and so on and so forth. So let me just turn off polyframe now. You'll see that from what we had, this is actually much better. Now I'm going to turn on or get out of solo mode so that I can see the effect of the claws, because remember we moved some certain things. So I'm going to select the claws in here, and I'm going to hold Control and Shift and click on this one. Remember that we already have different polygroups, and I'm going to go ahead and bring in the gizmo, center it to the selected subtool, and I'm just going to reposition this. Remember, we can reset the rotation by holding the Alt key, which is unlocking this lock icon here, and holding the Alt key and reset the rotation so that we can play around a little bit better with this rotation thing. All right, let's bring back the rest. Control and Shift, click on this one, center the gizmo. So as you can see, the more practice that you do and the more you use these tools, the faster you'll become with them. And then just switching between one and the other is going to become, like I said, second nature. It's going to be very easy. I'm going to actually push this one back a bit, bring them back again, and I think the other ones are fine. Maybe the thumb is a little bit weird. So I'm going to hold Control and Shift, select that, bring in the gizmo, center it, and adjust the shape. All right, bring back the rest of them. And now I can use my move topological, since, these ones are pretty close together, and we can start, adjusting the shapes again, creating something a little bit more interesting than just, the cylinders with the with the claw that we had before, or this sharp edge in here. All right, but that's essentially what I'm going to be doing. I'm just gonna do this in a time lapse so that you can see the process, but it's ultimately the same thing, or the same workflow. Now, in terms of these other assets, for example, the scarf here, I'm gonna go ahead and hold Alt and select that, go into solo mode, get a little bit closer, right? Make sure that you have a symmetry on. Let's get out of the solo mode. I'm gonna hold Shift to smooth this a little bit. If sometimes, and this is the one that I want to use as an example actually, if you press smooth right? And you start smoothing things, sometimes it becomes like really, really, really strong and it destroys the shape. So be careful about that. And the reason this is happening is for two reasons. The first one is that the intensity of the smooth brush is different from the current brush that you have selected. So basically, if I press the shift key, actually, let's go ahead and do it from the front view. If I press the shift key and then right click to bring in this pop-up, you'll see that the C intensity of the smooth brush is 100%. If I let go of the shift, it just defaults back to the move brush intensity, which is 51. Again, if I press shift, it accesses the smooth brush and now it's 100. So what I can do is just move this one a tiny bit more, like backwards, like 40 or 50, right? And that's gonna alleviate a little bit of that. Now, this is still super strong. And the reason why this is happening is because if we turn on polyframe, remember we have dynamic subdivision, right? And we have a subdivision of 2. So if we turn off dynamic, actually what we have here is a pretty simple shape, right? So if I use the smooth brush, I'm actually smoothing these few polygons, even though when we have the dynamic subdivision, the preview is as if we had way more resolution. But because this is just a preview, we actually smoothing a lot less polygons, and the effect is very strong. So let's go ahead and undo all that, right? And I'm just gonna reduce the strength of my smooth brush quite a bit, all right? And then I'm just gonna little by little start smoothing this out a bit on the borders, and then I'm gonna give it some shape. I'm gonna turn off the polyframe. A little trick, and this is nothing to do with the workflow, but I'll show you, is to actually enable polyframe, right? But you can turn off the line, right? So basically, this way you can see which is the tool that you have selected currently and the one that you're working on without the distraction of the polygons. So you can switch, holding Alt and click to the different polygroups, or sorry, subtools, and select and see that the one that you have with color is the one that you're working on. So that, again, that is just polyframe and turning off this little line inside the switch. I'm going to use the move topological. And another thing that I want to show you is that the move topological can also be used with AccuCurve. So if I click on AccuCurve, that is using the same effect as the move brush, but in the move topological, right? So I'm going to use this to just adjust this a tiny bit more and keep using the smooth brush. Maybe going to solo mode here at the back. All right, get out of solo mode. And we're gonna get to way more details in this case and doing the wrinkles and the folds and everything else later down the track. But for now, we just need to make sure that whatever we have in this blocking stage is a solid piece, or in terms of the design on the silhouette, is solid and it looks like the piece that we're trying to do. So I'm going for a very organic sort of shape in here. All right, and that's good. The little sleeping mat thingy that he's carrying here, I'm going to leave it as it is. The same thing for the backpack for now, because these ones are things that we're going to use, that we're using as a placeholder, and we're going to use later on in a different way. All right, so I think that's pretty much it in terms of the new tools that I wanted to show you. Remember, if for some reason you make a mistake because you didn't have symmetry enabled, you can very easily go ahead and do a mirror and weld operation. So for example, I'm going to turn off symmetry and I do something like this from this side maybe, and then I realize, oh, it's not in the other side and it's not the intention. You can just click mirror and weld, and so we're just going to mirror whatever is on this side to the other side and weld it together. And that's pretty much it. All right, so now I'm going to leave this as it is, so polyframe on, line off, and I'm going to jump into a final time lapse where I'm going to finish adjusting the shapes of this character. So using the same tools that I show you and the processes of masking as well as selecting different shapes, go ahead and do the same thing, continue adjusting these primitives and this blocking. All right, so I'll see you in a second. there you have it. So this is the final tweaking of the shape. So this is like the wrap up of this module, which is all about blocking. So as a quick recap, what we did in this entire module was to learn a few of the tools and a few of the processes to block in the shapes, to essentially start with a very basic, very primitive shape, very basic geometrical volume, and then from that start tweaking the shapes to form something a little bit more organic in this case, which is our character. So as you can see, this is starting to look a little bit more like a character with some features rather than simple spheres for the eyes and a half sphere for the head and that sort of thing. So that is the idea. Little by little, we're gonna start adding details and get something that looks much better, but we need to get the blocking right. So in the next module, I'm gonna introduce you to a bunch of new features that are really cool. We're gonna get a little bit more into sculpting, but we're still at this very stage of blocking things and setting pieces and assets before we actually add all those intricate and high frequency details that I'm sure that you're really looking forward to get into. Now, before I let you go, there is an extra lesson or a bonus lesson in this module where I'm going to show you some tips and tricks and some do's and don'ts. So go ahead and watch that one first, and I'll see you in the next module.